We'll talk about hyaline cartilage in more detail when we get to joints. That's where it's really going to be. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about fibrocartilage, and then I'm going to move from there into what's called synovium. And when I finish with synovium, at the end, hopefully at the end of the hour, I'll talk about the paper that. So first, fibrocartilage. It is, what do you notice? Here, I'll go back to the hyaline cartilage. Take a look at that. Take a look at that picture. Here, this is just a cartoon on the right, but on the left, it's an actual slide. Take a look at that slide, and then compare it to the similar pane on this side. How would you describe that difference? What would you say? Give me some difference. I'll go back again. Qualitatively, how would you describe the difference? What was that? They certainly both contain chondrocytes. Yeah, I mean they're cartilage, so they do have these cells. They both have cells. Can anybody maybe identify some things that look different between? Yeah. There's a matrix in both. There's matrix in both, yeah. So here, all of this purple stuff, this is matrix. The white circles are lacunae, which means just empty holes. Right? It's like a sponge, empty holes. And then the dark circles are the actual cells, the chondrocytes. And then here in the fibrocartilage, we have matrix as well. It's all this lighter stuff. These dark circles are the margins of the lacunae in the fibrocartilage. And the actual chondrocytes are the darkest. So in a very general sense, they have very similar structure. But qualitatively, how does this matrix that you point out, how does that look different? Yeah. It looks kind of stranded. It looks fibrous, doesn't it? As opposed to this, which looks more like a clear, continuous gel. Okay, and that is the principal observation I'm hoping to have you. I mean, there are differences in below, or these stacks of chondrocytes in one versus. But in general, the important thing, you'll notice there's sort of a directionality to the tissue. The tissue 10 in this image is running from this direction to that along the slice that they've taken. Those fibers that you see are thick bundles of collagen. All right, and because of that, fibrocartilage tends to have strength, high tensile strength along that directionality of the fiber placement. Okay, whereas hyaline cartilage, it's this sort of gel with the word I want to use is anisotropic without losing you guys. It means a sort of directionless, a non-directional sort of something that can handle non-directional compression. Whereas fibrocartilage is not being compressed as much as it's going to be resisting extension. Okay, so hyaline cartilage is you're going to find hyaline cartilage in joints where it's getting compressed often, like squeezed, and fibrocartilage is going to be resisting force being pulled, and we'll see where that happens. So it doesn't have a perichondrium, which is, but It does resist compression and absorbs shock. We find this in a bunch of places. So it's in the pubic symphysis, which doesn't impact much, but it's part of the menisci, which are the cartilaginous discs, I guess is adequate word, that are in the knees, that where the femur abuts the tibia. This guy, and importantly in the intervertebral discs. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here going over a few slides about the intervertebral disc that probably isn't in your slideshow because I just added them this morning to upload the slides. But I was going through them and I thought, oh, this is the right spot. So I'm going to do it here. I didn't talk about this, but here's an intervertebral disc. So here's a cartoon of vertebra, and here's the vertebral end plate. This is the body of the vertebra end plate here. And then setting right on top of it is one of these discs. There's two parts to a disc. There's the annulus fibrosus, the nucleus pulposus. The annulus fibrosus, what does that name seem to suggest to you? It's fibrous. Okay, good. That's the second half of the word. What about the first half? Annulus. What word is that kind of like? It's like years. Yeah, years. Like annual. Well, an annulus, when you take a cross section of a tree, the rings in a tree, a ring in a tree is an annulus. Okay, so and each ring in a tree is a year that goes by. So annulus is just these lamellar rings of fibrocartilage, and at the center of them is this nucleus pulposus. So the annulus fibrosus, this is our fibrocartilage. All right, lots of collagen that's running. The path of the fibrocartilage is running in a ring around it. At the middle, there's this jelly, this nucleus pulposus. Does anybody use like Asics shoes? Anyone use Asics? Yeah, I used to love them because they had these like gel packs in the heels. Remember when running shoe that I liked? And it's kind of the same thing. This gel, this fluid resists compression. It's strong. It's deformable, but it doesn't change its volume dramatically. And so, yoga instructor. This nucleus pulposus is at the core of this disc, and it's made of mostly water. There is a loose, sort of less uniformly disposed mesh of collagen, but it's mostly water and proteoglycans. Have I talked about proteoglycans yet at all, even remotely? A little bit? Not at all? Never even heard the word? Okay, cool. Well, a glycan is a carbohydrate of some sort. Right? It's a complex carbohydrate, typically a large carbohydrate. And a proteoglycan is a large sugar chain, a large carbohydrate. And I'm not talking, when I say carbohydrate, I'm not talking about, baguettes here or maple syrup, anything like that, pancakes and maple syrup. I'm talking about, yes, sugars, carbohydrates that get put together in for structural purposes. They're not used as energy. So, for example, cellulose is wood fiber, right? It serves a structural purpose. And so the glycans that I'm talking about here are not necessarily used for energy. They're used for structural purposes. You're going to get more about glycans in a little bit. you want, but these glycans are attached to proteins. It's these protein carbohydrate hybrids that the thing about them is they really like water. They really like water. They suck up water. They hold water to them. They resist dehydration. All right. So you can imagine that those would be good things to have in this jelly, right? To maintain the hydration in this jelly. These sugars that are these protein sugars that are going to be very hydrophilic. The amount of water in this jelly, turns out it varies throughout the day based upon your general state of hydration. People tell you that after yoga, go and drink a bunch of water, and that's fine. Go drink a bunch of water, but actually the water that you drink before yoga is going to be more protective of your joint health, and particularly pulposus. So doing yoga not dehydrated is it's better to drink the water before the yoga, within that hour before. So anyways, and sadly, everything seems to slide downhill as you get older. The water concentration does decrease with age. All right, so here's a little bit of the biomechanics of the disc. It's important to understand what's happening to the disc. Is it a little small? Is it hard to read there? Okay. So when you're standing upright, there's this compressive force from the disc above, the vertebra above down onto the disc, where the disc is being compressed, but that nucleus pulposus is pushing out, and the annulus fibrosus is resisting that expansion, right? It's like bands on a barrel that are resisting the expansion of that jelly, the nucleus pulposus that's inside of it. So that nucleus pulposus is putting out there, pushing out to the sides, and the fibrocartilage is getting compressed this way, but it's being pulled this way by the force pushing from outside, outside from inside the disc. Okay. When we do a forward bend, we're bending forward. This is anterior. This is posterior in this cartoon here. When we bend forward, we squeeze the front of the disc and release pressure on the back of the disc, the posterior margin. And that gel pushes posteriorly. And so, yes.
No, this is
Stuart. Okay. And the annulus fibrosus in the posterior is subjected to higher forces than it normally would just standing. We relieve the tension on the front, but we increase the tension on those fibers in the back of the annulus fiber, pulling them even tighter. And then, of course, oppositely, when we're doing a back bend, we anteriorly displace the nucleus pulposus, the rings in the front. When we do a side bend, one way or the other, whatever direction you're bending the spine, that nucleus pulposus is going to shift in the opposite direction and put tension on the annulus fibrosus on that side, on the side opposite. Everybody with me so far? And then lastly, when we do a twist, when we have a twist, the thing about a twist is the upper and lower vertebral end plates are going in opposite direction. All right, they're turning in opposite direction, and so as we do that, we're still getting the compression. So the nucleus pulposus is pushing out, but as we spin it, those fibers are closing up and constricting the nucleus. All right, it's just like if you take a braided rope and you unroll it, those fibers come apart, right? But when you twist it up, they tighten back together, and that's what's happening with the annulus fibrosus when we're doing a twist. All right, so a twist is kind of accentuating the pressure of standing in some ways. It's accentuating the pressure. And when you do a twist with a bend, that is some of your most vulnerable, your discs are at their most vulnerable, because not only are you increasing the force of the nucleus pulposus inside the disc, but when you're getting a bend, you're putting a directionality to that. So all of that increased pressure is being directed at a single point in the annulus fibrosus. All right. So most herniation injuries that happen to discs during yoga, and they do happen, yoga is real. It can be dangerous if done incorrectly. Happen during bending twists. For example, this is why when you do shoulder stand, where you're getting a deep flexion of the neck, it's really important to not turn your neck during that. Okay? Definitely don't want herniations in your neck. Those are the worst. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to.
So patient. Thank you.
No, you're fine. So for.
Yeah.
So that's the way they.
Slip disc. Yeah. I'm glad you asked. I think this will answer your question. So here is some pathology. I'm showing you some problems that can happen with the discs and what that means. Here's the way a normal vertebral disc might look. Here is how the normal disc looks in cross section. We can see the nucleus pulposus, the fibrosis. Here we see it from. I'm sorry, the labelings. Here's the disc, fibrosis. Here's your spinal cord. Here are their nerve roots. Spinal root side. These are the nerves that are emerging from what are called the intervertebral foramina. That's this hole right here that you see. It's intervertebral. No problem. Nice, happy gap between the disc and the nerve. However, problems ensue. One of them can be herniation. So, people your age, this is the most likely thing that happen. And this is where you can have. It doesn't actually have to be a full herniation, bulge. Thinning of the wall, annulus fibrosus, torn and thinned, and it's like a pre-hernia. That disc can then push on the nerve, and you get a pinched nerve. All right, you pinched nerve, and when you have that pinched nerve, that is associated with some kind of pathology. It can be associated with a loss of feeling or dysesthesia, so like a tingling or just a loss of sensation entirely. It can be associated with paresis or muscle weakness, so a lack of muscle control. So the dysesthesias are those are sensory nerves up, right, up to the afferents, and then there are the efferents that are coming down, and that's the motor nerves that control. So when you pinch, you can pinch a nerve, you can impinge that nerve, impair the ability of that nerve to send a signal. Particularly on the dorsal root ganglion, the problem. This is where these somatosensory nerve bodies are for the peripheral nerves. Cell bodies. So the herniation happens. This nucleus pulposus jelly just gets squirt right out. It's like in a jelly donut. If you've ever had a jelly donut, and you like squeeze on the jelly donut, and there's always a hole in the jelly donut somewhere. where the jelly got in, and it can just like start squirting out that hole, right? That's kind of what a herniation is. It's like a squeezing a jelly donut. Yes. Ooh, yeah, yeah. It will heal. It can heal. I shouldn't say will. It can heal in some cases with the right kind of. Was it freaking you out? Yeah, yeah. They're common. It can heal in some cases with the right kind of therapy. Other cases require surgical intervention, and those can run from the mild, like say you don't have a hernia, you just have like a bulged disc. You can get your disc shaved. You can shave a little bit of, you know, shave a little bit of the fibrocartilage off of there and relieve some of the pressure on the nerve, up till surgical rescission of the disc and fusion of spinal fusion. Those two vertebrae are not going to move. You can't bend them. So there are different. There's a whole range. Sometimes just with gentle traction and the right kind of diet and physical therapy, you can heal some disc for sure. But it's hard, right? Because what did I say about cartilage? What's the thing about cartilage? Not well. You mean a petri dish?
Yeah.
The thing that I'm getting at here was this word here. It's avascular. There are no blood vessels. Blood is good. Blood is good. Blood carries nutrients. Blood carries cells. Blood brings water. Blood brings oxygen. Blood takes waste products away. Cartilage doesn't have any of it, right? So we're going to get to the implications of that and how to deal with that in a bit. Yes, ma'am.
That means someone with scoliosis whose spine is irregular. Do they?
I believe that, so I don't have numbers, epidemiological backing to the statement, but I do believe that people with scoliosis have a higher incidence of disc herniation. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, you're like with a spinal fusion, you can imagine it being like you have a house, you build a house, um, but maybe I built this building here, and I just didn't put the girders into this wall. Like here I'll just throw some drywall up and go. Okay, and of course it's not gonna fly, and the building starts to collapse or whatever. Like, oh my god, we were wrong. We needed some girders. And so then you go on the outside of the building and you like screw a bunch of girders into the side of the building, right? And you've like stuck it on the outside. That is never as structurally sound as the like innate evolved physiology, right, and anatomy that was meant to serve whatever purpose. And so, spinal fusions have danger. It does not mean that these people are completely incapacitated, but
Yeah.
it's a challenge. So, moving on from, so this is like usually can be chronic, but typically some kind of acute injury. Most people your age did something stupid to have that happen to them. Maybe like fell off a horse or went pose or something. And But this here is the stuff that is potentially waiting for like 2/3 of us. So degenerated discs. This is like broadly averaged across the whole adult population. And you guys already, just by virtue of being here, so with time, particularly in the sedentary lifestyle that we lead and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to get to that in a bit, like the ways that we can help prevent this. But without taking proper care of the soft tissue, the collagen, which yoga is such a lovely way to you can lead to disc. So the nucleus pulposus with time becomes dehydrated. And not enough fluid is in there. The chondrocytes die off, and the fibrocartilage degrades, and the disc more and more compressed to the point where you get these spondylophytes or bone spurs. You don't want those. Bone spurs are where one vertebra starts touching another, and they're quite painful. You bend, yeah, oh man. What's that? Yeah. Bone spur, yeah. So a bone spur is it's a projection of bone that is pathologic for one reason or another. Yeah, obviously a totally different origin in this, but so what do we have? And as this, in the absence of a herniation, as this disc degenerates, the width of the annulus fibrosus gets smaller, but it gets more compressed, spread out, and this becomes even more of a problem. It's not just pushing the nerve roots, the actual spinal. So that those people, people with herniation tend to get unilateral pathology, like on the right side or left side. People with degenerated discs have bilateral problems, and not specifically located to a single dermatome. So a dermatome is a region of the body that's controlled by a single nerve root. It's going to be everything below this. You have that. So disc degeneration can be quite debilitating. Yes, ma'am. Well, certainly there are types of yoga that help. Say you get to a point where yoga alone is not helping you, of course, and you need some kind of intervention. There are surgical interventions for that, traction and spinal to like bring space in there. There are ways of dealing with it, but when you're here, when you're at this point, chances are that this bone is not solid wood. Putting these bars in those vertebrae when you are a young woman, it's easy to mount that stuff, and the bone takes it, and it's like pretty stable. If you're here, chances are pretty high, you've got osteoporosis, and so those, and so osteoporosis is like a really complicating factor to that. So if I were to give you a take-home lesson for the day, take like the choices you make, particularly between the ages of 25 and 45, have the most profound impact on your quality of life, your overall health, but particularly the health of your connective tissue, your soft tissue, and your bones when you become elderly. Yes? Yes, we'll talk about that. I'm glad you're anticipating what I'm going to talk about. You guys, like I feel like I'm putting this whole talk together in such a good order because like my slides are answering. Yeah.
Does the way you sleep?
Sure, absolutely it can. Absolutely it can. Yeah. I used to sleep on my side. I don't any longer because of the what it did to my neck. I didn't like that, so I trained myself to be a back sleeper. But you have to find what is right for you.
The sleep. Do you know how the I don't know how like
I used to sleep on the floor for years and years and years, and it just kind of makes my back a little stiff now. But if it works for you, I think then go with it. I think your body will tell you. If you wake up and oh my god, you feel like you're 65 when you are in fact 18, maybe that's not the right way. Let's move on. Okay, so here we go. Um, yeah, this is spinal compression. It's a good thing, right? Normal spinal compression is a good thing. Here's this person. She's standing up, and there's some spinal compression. What's happening here is that fibrocartilage is getting compressed and squeezing water and nutrients out, just like a sponge. You take a sponge, you squeeze it out, and it pushes out the fluid in the tissue. That brings the water out, and with it, any waste products. Okay, I have water, O2, and nutrients, but actually, it's not bringing O2, CO2 out and waste product. And then you get in Uttanasana, the forward bend, you get spinal decompression. This is the good stuff, kids. This is it, right? This like passive inversion stuff. It's passive inversion, not when you're doing a headstand, because that's not what we're talking about. That does different. When you do a headstand or shoulder stand or something like that, you're still getting spinal compression. Passive inversion, where you get the spinal decompression, like forward bend, wide angle forward bend, whatever, any kind of thing like that, where the torso is hanging off the hips. All right. What that does is that's gently pulling on the vertebral discs. And as you're doing that, you're sucking water into the fibrocartilage. You're sucking fluid into it. Because remember, this cartilage is avascular. It's avascular. And so you do this passive inversion. You're drawing the water with oxygen and nutrients into those chondrocytes to keep them happy and healthy. And they do need nutrients. The specific nutrients they need are what are called N-acetylated sugars. We're going to see in a moment what N-acetylated sugars are, what these kinds of... Yes, ma'am. Oh, yeah. Here, should I just change that right on this slide right now in front of you guys? We'll just do it. CO2 and waste. This is another instance. Yeah. Yeah, it's not, this is not like, standing is not pathology. It's just,
When you
oops.
joints, that all in like joints, is that
When you pop your joints. Joint popping is called cavitation. And joint popping can relieve pressure on the cartilage. I don't want to get into the discussion of cavitation because, first of all, they don't really even understand cavitation especially well. You go talk to a chiropractor, they're going to tell you like a number of different things that may or may not actually be true. But yeah, I've had a hard time ever finding like conclusive evidence as to exactly what a cavitation is. I kind of tend to believe that it's two articular surfaces just snapping against one. You have like slight subluxation of the joint and it resets or and that's going to do some things to the synovial joint that we can talk about, but I don't want you guys to all go out there and start cracking all your because you think it's good for your cartilage.
But
you wouldn't say it's bad.
No, I don't think it's bad necessarily. No. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
That might be.
Yeah. Well, what you don't want to do when you're getting a cavitation in your spine, you don't want to force it in such a way that causes an acute injury of your disc, right? Like that's what you don't want. And as to exactly what's happening, it is easy for people to get their vertebra out of alignment, and it's clear that sometimes when you crack it, it feels better. It's somehow relieved some pressure that is somehow positional pressure that's lined itself up incorrectly. So like she said and I said, they don't actually have an especially good physical description for what is generating that sound. I've heard people say, "Oh, it's releasing nitrogen gas," and like that from a chiropractor, and that is not what's happening. I don't care what that person says. So they don't even have an understanding of that, much less the effect that has on cartilage. So that's a pretty open question, I would say. All right. Okay. So I guess that's all I had on vertebral discs. Can I move on? All right. So a lot of this connective tissue stuff, I went through epithelium, I went through connective tissue, and now I'm going to try to bring them together. I'm going to bring them together in what are called tissue membranes. And tissue membranes, there's 4 types of tissue membranes in the body. I'll say the names of them. The only one that's actually relevant to what we're going to be discussing here is this third one, but I'll just go through them so you hear them. Mucous membranes, these are things that produce mucus that are on the passageways that have external connections, so like your GI tract, your urogenital tract, that kind of thing. Then serous membranes, these are membranes that line cavities that are not open to the outside, so like your pericardium or the pleura that surrounds your lungs, or the peritoneum, this membrane that covers all of your abdominal viscera. It's a serous membrane. The fourth is your cutaneous membrane, that's your skin. And this third here is a synovial membrane. Synovial membranes are membranes that line moving, articulating joint cavities. And we'll see what this means. I'm going to expand upon this as we discuss what synovial joints actually are. All right? So in general, any of these tissue membranes, what you would want to remember is that this is what they are. ET over epithelial tissue over connective. That's the definition. It's a layer of epithelium on top of a layer of ET over C. That's a tissue membrane. And then, I indicated with a triangle, bold, and an asterisk, just in case you notice that was the only one that's actually relevant. Questions on this so far? So these synovial membranes line the inside of a joint cavity. So here's a bone, here's a bone, here's the articular cartilage. Here's another plate of articular cartilage. This is hyaline cartilage. And then inside this joint cavity, it's lined with a layer, an incomplete layer of epithelium, simple squamous epithelium. Simple meaning a single layer, squamous meaning flat and squashed. Simple squamous epithelium laying on top of areolar tissue. We talked about that quite a bit too, with all the collagen and the fibrocytes and all the other cell tissue, that loose, stretchy stuff with the clear ground substance. Remember that? So the epithelium, remember I talked about the properties, the general properties of epithelium. There's a polarity to them. There's like a top and a bottom, right? A basolateral and an apical surface. This apical surface is facing out into the joint cavity here. And often these epithelial cells have some sort of cellular product that they make, that they release out through that apical surface. In this case, it's synovial fluid. All right, synovial fluid. So this membrane is called synovium. The tissue membrane here is the layer of epithelial cells and the areolar tissue. This tissue membrane is called synovium. It makes synovial fluid. These epithelial cells make synovial fluid and release it into the joint capsule. Yeah. So this synovial fluid is pretty remarkable stuff. It is a lubricant, and we'll see how it acts as a lubricant. It's a lubricant for the joints. It also acts as a shock absorber, much like the nucleus pulposus. So it's an incompressible fluid that absorbs shock waves when one bone bangs against another. And then lastly, it is the fluid that contains the oxygen and nutrients and water that the chondrocytes here in the hyaline cartilage, in the articular cartilage, are going to need. So that's how the cartilage, the synovial fluid in the joint is how that articular cartilage gets what it needs to survive. All right, synovial fluid. Okay, cool. So let's look a little bit more closely. Whoa, dude. Those. It's like chemistry. Whew. Okay. It'll be fine. We're going to look at some of the molecules in there. And I'm not expecting you in any way, shape, or form to draw these structures, right? That's not why they're up there. I want you to understand some properties about them. I'm putting their structures on there so to help you. Here is what's called a glycosaminoglycan. It's related to a proteoglycan. Again, it's a molecule that is made of carbohydrates and proteins. All right? We call it a glycosaminoglycan. GAG. So these are carbohydrates. They're types of carbohydrates. This, for example, is a glucuronic acid. It's a glucose molecule with the hydroxymethyl group turned into a carboxylic acid. And this is a galactose. So that's the galactose that has a different configuration about the C4 hydroxy. The glucose and the O2 has an acetyl group. And then lastly, it's sulfated. It has a sulfate group attached to hydroxy. So that's a pretty strange sugar molecule to most people. When they think of sugar, they don't think of galnac 6 sulfate. I'll go to the cupboard. But it is indeed a sugar. It's indeed an important sugar because it helps make up chondroitin sulfate. Look at this word here, chondroitin. The chondro refers to cartilage. So chondroitin sulfate is an important carbohydrate found in the matrix of cartilage. Cartilaginous matrix needs it, and it can get it from the synovial fluid. All right, that's how it gets it, because that's how those cells get everything. Right? There's no blood going. So when you see this, this is a dimer, a disaccharide, 2 of them, and it's a repeating unit. So you get a long chain of them. And what you see here are these little beads on a chain, a hexagon. They're just models of this in long chains of this repeating glucuronic acid galactose. There are other sugars in here as well. So we have keratan sulfate. It's another related sugar disaccharide repeat. And we have high hyaluronic acid, or the conjugate base, high hyaluronic. So these are common sugars, common glycosyl portions that get attached to this protein core. There's this long protein core that has these big branching sugars off of it. And so what we see here is an example of this. And you see this line running down the middle. This can be a protein. It's going to have long carbohydrates coming off of it. So I wrote a few facts about chondroitin sulfite and high hyaluronic acid. In blood vessels and bone, responsible for stiffness and cartilage, anionic substance, viscous, slippery, joint lubricant, vitreous of the eyeball, etc., etc. The thing I want you to focus on is that when you look at these structures, what do you notice about them chemically? What do you notice about them? What do you see? Yeah. A lot of carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. A lot of oxygen. A lot of OH groups. There's OH groups all over them. The carbohydrates, that's what. But more than that, there's a lot of negative charge. Here's a negative charge. Here's a negative charge. Here's a negative charge. Here's a negative charge. They love to be in solution. They're super hydrophilic. They like to be in solution. They hold water very strongly. But more importantly, with all of those negative charges on them, do negative charges like each other? No. So let's see here. There's a lot of anionic repulsion. So here are two negative magnets that are pushing each other away. When you have this big branch structure, it doesn't collapse down onto itself. It fluffs it up. It fluffs itself up nice and big, so it keeps all of these negative charges away from one another. Keeps all the negative charges away from one another. And allows these glycosaminoglycans to be maximally hydrated. This is how they hold water in. So one of the take-homes here is that for optimal joint health, you need to stay hydrated and you need to have an appropriate dietary source of unacetylated sugars. You need, because it's hard to just make that stuff. You can, your body does, but you need the raw materials. Yes, ma'am. If you are not a vegetarian, if you're an omnivore, it's fairly straightforward. Bone broth is an excellent source of them. So like chicken broth, when they boiled the chicken down, we've talked about how it turns kind of gelatinous or whatever. That gelatinous stuff is that stuff. And you can get it from fish, like small, like anchovies, pretty salty dose, but that kind of thing. So like those little cartilaginous, awesome dietary source. You can get them on a vegetarian diet as well, but the concentrations of them in various foods are significantly lower. So you have to, for example, spinach. You can get unacetylated sugar a lot more. Yeah, the best source is not meat necessarily, but yeah. Okay, so and here we're talking about hydration. So you can have one of these glycosaminoglycans dehydrated. You add water to it, and just like, what are those things called? Orbeez. Yeah, okay, whatever. You add water to them, they absorb that water and grow, right? In the same way, because water begins to intercalate itself. You see, here's a water molecule between here's between the N-acetyl group of the glycnac and the uronate group on the glycuronic acid, the adjacent. Okay, so that was a lot of chemical words, but there's these two negative charges, and the water just like slides itself right in there and gets held really tightly because this is a strong bond, this is a strong hydrogen bond. It's resonance stabilized on that carboxylate anion right there. Okay. Not going to ask you to draw that. I'm not going to ask you to draw any of this, but understanding that they're anionic, and it's that anionic charge that makes them open up structurally and then stay hydrated, highly hydrated. That's the important thing. Joint health is about hydration, about appropriate nutrition, and then those two things are fine, but they don't do anything if you don't get fluid into the tissue, right? And so that's where the yoga comes in, actually delivering the goods, okay? So let's keep going. How much synovial fluid is too much? So you may think, wow, like the more synovial fluid, the better my joints are going to be. That's not actually the case. Oftentimes, synovium responds to injury by producing more synovial fluid, and you get this edema. So say you injure a joint. Everybody's probably sprained their ankle before. Has anyone not sprained their ankle? Okay, well, lucky for you. God, I messed my... But if you injure a joint, often that joint is going to swell because the injury happens. The synovium might get torn a little bit, or something gets hurt, and it releases these pro-inflammatory compounds in that joint, which cause the synovium to like start pumping out more fluid. It's called edema. That swelling is called edema, to deliver more nutrients and blah blah blah. But that swelling restricts the motion of the joint, and it can actually be destructive. You want and try to reduce inflammation. So you do not want to like do so much yoga that you start swelling. If that happens, stop. Do not use that joint again. Let yourself heal. Get some ice. Seek medical attention if you need it. All right. And so the other problem is because if you have chronic inflammation, in a joint, that is going to lead to arthritis. A chronic inflammatory process is going to lead to the slow wearing away of the hyaline cartilage, the downregulation of the chondrocytes, their eventual death. So yeah, you want to avoid inflammation. In general, yoga is really good for reducing inflammation. But if you go too far, you injure a tissue, you can increase inflammation and do good. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on how hard you're exercising. In general, if you're like an elite athlete and you've got that thing going, then it's like we'll have a different conversation. But in general, for just like life fitness, super extreme exercise is not actually the way you want to go, right? It's good to do cardiovascular stuff, to maintain like a baseline. But honestly, as you get older, the best exercise is weight-bearing exercise because that maintains bone density, joint health, and then core muscle strength, which enables you to have and like range of motion, so that core muscle strength, so you can get up out of the chair without having to get like one of those digital robot chairs, lazy boys that'll catapult you. Those things are a thing. They are. little lazy boy catapults that'll just.
Not that.
No, it's not that dramatic.
It's not a cat.
Well, yeah. Absolutely, they're lovely. They're not silly. I'm saying you don't want to have to use them until you need to use that thing. And so quality of life is strongly correlated with core strength as you get older, just the ability to do this, right? Just that ability, that like chair pose that we're talking about. Like that strength, the ability to do that as you get older is correlated with independence. And if you can't get it out of a chair by yourself, and you unfortunately need one of these not silly, important home care devices, then it's a little bit of a loss of independence. Okay, I want to keep going. God, I go so slow sometimes. Right, I don't know. All right. Avoid joint damage during yoga. So pay attention to any pain in or around a joint. Modify the alignment. Ask for a teacher. Figure it out because you don't want actual pain. You want to modify it so we can eliminate the pain. So if you're having pain in, around, or a joint, it means one of two things. You've either overstretched the connective tissue, the tendons or the ligaments, right, which are there to stabilize the joint. You don't want to do that. If you continue to do that, you can get joint hypermobility, which is a problem. And the other problem may be that you're overcompressing the joint surface. Also bad. Also a bad thing to be avoided. And doing that contributes to arthritis. So, on the other hand, mild, unforced movements can actually help heal joints. So you want to keep the joints moving in ways that are supportive and help to circulate synovial fluid and like gentle compression and extension and release of the articular cartilage, et cetera, et cetera. That's great for a joint, right? It's a great thing. Okay. So, yes, I did it. Okay, made it. Any questions on that? Okay. So let's dive into this question, this paper. This is going to set us up. This paper that I picked out here is going to set us up for the next unit that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about bone health and the thyroid. The next series of thyroid, bone health, calcium homeostasis, our first real exploration of homeostasis, and the thyroid and the yoga poses that are related to that. But I want to talk about connective tissue and how this relates to the thyroid will come in later. All right, so everybody found this paper okay? Everybody uploaded it? No, just the PDF of the paper, and you bring the paper in and hand it to me. Yeah. Well, it's okay. We're talking about it now, so I haven't checked any of that. So whatever. If you have the PDF, just upload it to Moodle sometime whenever. And I'm unlikely to get to it anytime before tomorrow. So, yeah, what do I want to say? Here we go. There she is. This woman, Helene Langevin. She is in Vermont, I think. Is that right? Yeah. University of Vermont College of Medicine in Burlington. Yeah, she's a physician out there. So, yeah, the mice. Yeah, I know. It was kind of interesting for me picking out this paper because I was wondering in a class about yoga, I wonder how you guys would respond to an article that employed animal sacrifice. I mean, these mice, yeah, gave it up, the cause of science. So what their finding was that muscle stretch decreases the presence of this tissue growth factor, tissue growth factor beta 1. There's several different types of tissue growth factor. This is beta 1. And then also the presence of type 1 procollagen, which is a precursor to collagen. In the subcutaneous tissue, the connective tissue. So what they would do is they'd make a little cut in the mouse, and they take the blade and they would slice through the connective tissue underneath the mouse's skin. And they would let it heal, and some of the mice would just like chill out and be thankful that they were being left alone. And the other ones were subject to kind of enforced yoga, where they were suspended, where their feet are on the wall and their other feet, their forelegs, are on the floor. They're doing some kind of like really extreme. They're holding them by the tail. Yeah. Yeah. Well, they're trying to put these paws down. They can't. They can get those paws down, and they're sort of like it's causing them to stretch their back by like 30%. Yes, they did. So this is the control, no micro injury. This is what mice look like if you don't do this to them, right? If you don't do this to them, this is what their cytomastoid, this dorsi. This is the fascia that's in between them, nice and open, etc. Here, the blue is a stain for collagen. So when you see the blue stain, you see it's a really thick, tight band of collagen, right? So this sternocleidomastoid and latissimus dorsi are not able to move against one. Whereas these two muscles can contract independently. The sternocleidomastoid contracts. In this case, it's going to pull that latissimus dorsi with it. It's going to lose muscular independence in that case. All right, you guys following this? They would have taken the blade and gone through that fascial. Okay. Yeah, they would have separated the two of them, let it heal, and then it healed with all that. This is people that didn't. Mice that didn't have that. The other is mice that didn't. And so this down here is staining, again, staining for procollagen, which is associated with the production of collagen. And you can see that there is a lot more procollagen. So newly formed collagen. Procollagen is like the precursor. Newly formed. This is not just like collagen that was there already. They're showing that this is a response that was elicited due to the healing process and the injury. So now they looked at the presence of this hormone called transforming growth factor. Here it is. It's a protein. This is what the protein looks like in ribbon diagram. And it is a secreted polypeptide cytokine. It's going to control a number of different things. The name was tissue growth, proliferation of cells, differentiation, apoptosis, which is a fancy word for the kill switch on a cell. And if there is no stretch in the mice, the value was really high compared to whether there was a stretch, day 3 after that injury. All right, so there was a much higher incidence of this hormone that controls the production of all these different things, the cell growth, proliferation, etc. Running out of time, don't want to get to that. Let's just get to the chase. So on one hand, we have tissue injury, no stretch. Tissue growth factor is high, and there's this increased fibritic response, which leads to high tissue adhesion. All right. On the other hand, in the stretch response, something about stretching causes a reduction, the mechanical process of stretching causes a reduction in tissue growth factor beta 1, which reduces that fibrotic response and leads to a decrease in tissue adhesion. The take-home message here from this is that stretching reduces a pro-inflammatory hormone in the connective tissue that allows that connective tissue to be more supple, all right, and have less collagen. When you have this kind of situation, that may be harder for neogenesis of blood vessels, and maybe harder. That tissue is just more restricted and constricted. That's the take home that we'll refer to when I talk about the thyroid and shoulder stand and calcium homeostasis and bone. You with me? So hand in your little review sheet on that paper, and I'll see you this afternoon.